This interview is brought to you in association with Rabobank.
Water management, adverse events, local, regional, national policy settings, biosecurity, trade, education, skills, training, health are just some areas of ongoing concern for many farmers around the country. There's a long-standing organisation that's across all of these issues and more besides. It is, of course, Federated Farmers of New Zealand. And with me to discuss some of these is first-term National President Katie Milne. Katie, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Katie, what drew you to the role?
What drew me to the role was having a clear passion for wanting a fair deal for farmers, and I didn't actually set out to get the role, but in my journey through being involved with Federated Farmers as a dairy chair on the West Coast and then as a provincial president and dealing with RMA and mediation and so on, I found myself in the role after quite a journey.
Okay. Tell us about your own farm.
Yeah, we farm 220 high BW jerseys on the West Coast at Lake Brunner, above the lake in the Lake Brunner catchment, and we're a low input system. Do get a little bit of straw from Canterbury. We call that importing sunshine. We do need a little extra dose of that every now and again. And my daughter and son-in-law have just come back to work on the farm after having, he was a builder by trade, or is a builder by trade, and she's travelled around various jobs, got a Bachelor of Science, and was actually working for Farm Source before she decided that the husband and her would like to have a crack at farming. So that's us.
Did you grow up on a farm or on the coast?
Yeah, I did. I'm a fifth-generation West Coaster. Actually, my heritage is all sheep and beef farms, mainly beef, and they are still farming down south of the glaciers on the Paringa and the Mahitahi River.
Right. You've been quoted as saying that your number one priority in the role is about connecting urban and rural New Zealanders. What gave you that drive?
That's right. Yeah, no, I absolutely believe that that's something that all farmers need to try and do their best to help. And I have been very active in doing that, trying to take up opportunities to speak to town people wherever I can, and in the way I speak, on the radio or on TV, trying to put things in a simple way for people so that they can actually get back to realising that farmers just actually grow food and that we can be trusted to do that, and that we are quite innovative and look to solutions where we see issues arising, as in who knew about diffuse nutrients, etc. a few, 10, 15 years ago. Now we know about it, and now we're doing all sorts of things on farm, as well as with technology that, and the institutes are developing for us to help solve those problems. So that, to me, simple messaging around that stuff is what I'm about, because sometimes when you get too thick into the science, even though that informs us and is excruciatingly important, sometimes it makes people's eyes glaze over, and that's not helpful when you're trying to tell a good story.
There's a conversation in New Zealand at the moment which talks about something called an urban-rural divide. Do you think there is an urban-rural divide, and if so, where is it? What's it about? Where's it come from?
Yeah, and it's a horrible term, really, isn't it? But it is just basically a lack of understanding, and it's grown out of the shift in social reality, actually. And I think it'll be a hard thing to turn around, in that it is just a natural progression everywhere in the world that people have left rural areas and become city dwellers. It's a fact of humanity where we end up. So that's why I talk about that, letting people know the basic stuff again, that we grow food, and that, we all have the same interests at heart. We want a great environment, we want great water, we want great animal welfare outcomes. We're all on the same page there, but our perspective and our views and how we should get there and what that means to us might be quite different. I think it's a product of just, progression. Like 100 years ago, we didn't hand milk cows. Now we've got technology that changes. People have moved to cities and they have lost connection with their farming roots, and they don't necessarily have, families they can go and visit on farm anymore like we did when we were kids.
Yep. If we unpick one of those issues you mentioned, water, now there's an awful lot of talk going around New Zealand at the current time about a whole lot of options for solving our water problem. You've had direct experience with Lake Brunner, where of the capital and the community and the organisational level commitment it takes to deal with a waterway which is under some distress. From that experience, what approach do you think is best going to meet, I guess, the desire of all New Zealanders for healthy, fresh, clean, safe waterways?
The interesting thing with the project around Lake Brunner that is the most striking to me is the fact that it was done all on a voluntary basis. The Regional Council did put in a few rules around phosphorus and so on, because that's our issue. It's not nitrogen for the lake, it's phosphorus. About how you could develop land and so on, and swapping around usage of fertiliser. But other than that, all the things we did were voluntary. And the most interesting thing was that we did 2 surveys 5 years apart. And at the start, everyone did a farm plan, and they got on board, and we got great buy-in for a start, because it's a great lake. You know, everyone wanted to make sure that it was good, and we were quite horrified to think that A, there was a change in the trend, and that B, we were to blame. Now, when we looked into it, we thought, maybe there's a lot more going on here than just the farms. But we knew, as landowners, we were the only people who could make a change. You know, environmental factors of rainfall and slippage and so on in the hills was something no one could do anything about. So the only thing we could change was what happened on farm. Everyone got that, and through voluntary methods, we went forward. What we did find out was that, for a start, people were a little bit frightened of how much they could invest, but the farm plan showed them where their hot points were and what they could do, and gave them a 5 to 10 year plan of what they could do. They voluntarily signed up for what they could afford to do. We did a review, and people were a little bit conservative on that because they didn't know what cash flow would be like over that time frame. When we did the follow-up review, we discovered that there'd been a hell of a lot more money spent than what anyone ever signed up for. They'd put in extra bridges at the quicker time frame, because once they understood what the problems were and where the hot points were on their farm, they had a pathway of how to have best effect, and so they just followed that. As more cash was available, or they made cash available, they did things beyond what they had committed to. So that tells me that non-regulatory methods, if people understand their problems properly in their catchment, they will go the extra mile to have a great outcome. Because nobody wants to be the person who, turned a waterway, basically, to crap.
Regardless of the outcome of our election, this is going to be an issue which is firmly in the national conscience. What type of response or evolved response are we likely to see from Feds in terms of the overall policy settings that you're seeking as we go around having that national conversation about waterways? Yeah,
well, again, from what we've learnt over time, we know that good science and good data informs what needs to happen in catchments. And so generally, when people understand that, they're happy to figure out what the best way forward is for their catchment to have a good outcome. There's some that don't necessarily respond to that, but we've found peer pressure drags everyone along relatively quickly, actually. And also there's often economic benefits in some of the stuff people have done, e.g. bridges, the speed of getting cows, in. And some of these are pretty small waterways that people at home have bridged. There's economic benefit sometimes as well, but socially there's benefits to knowing that you've just done the right thing. So we will be pushing for the more non-regulatory approach, because actually that's what farmers are already doing, and that's continue along. When people know more, they do more. I think there's a lot of relatively uninformed people about who think that farming is the same as it was, 20 years ago or 30 years ago, whenever they last visited a farm. And we know that's not correct, and we know that people have embraced making improvements all the time that will give environmental benefit. So we think there's a lot further we can go with that, and there's a lot of new technology that's coming along. We all know about precision irrigation and where that's taking us, whether you've got irrigation or whether it's just about putting nutrients on, at appropriate times, and different ways of doing that, split dressings and all sorts of things, and a whole multitude of new other technology that's coming that are going to enable us to drive these sort of outcomes even further, high environmental outcomes and higher animal welfare and so on. So I think there's a long way we can go through non-regulatory methods, and we will be pushing for that.
Okay, moving away from the farm now, you hold more or less the equivalent of the trade portfolio for Feds. What sort of outcomes in a very volatile trade environment for New Zealand are you going to be pushing for over the next few years?
Yeah, well, obviously the amount of domestic support that other nations give their farmers around the world is a high priority. It has been for a long time, and to get that level playing field, a lot of those goals, those same things that the trade negotiators and likes of ourselves, they haven't changed. We need that level playing field. There's an example at the moment. If TPP had gone through, we were looking at a 9% tariff for both New Zealand and Australia for beef, for example, into Japan. And at the moment, we've clicked in over a quota system that's there, and so we're paying 50% at the moment, and the Australians are only paying 27%. So clearly we're at a huge disadvantage, and that's just one particular market. So, we want to have that level playing field evolve, keep pushing, keep whoever is in power to, keep driving those trade negotiations. And there's a lot of them going on around the world. It's stunning how many different talks are going on. But, it's an absolute key for us and has been ever since we had our own domestic support taken away in 1984.
Coming back closer to home again, you also hold the rural health spokesperson's portfolio. Again, an area where there is pressure on resources. We've talked to lots of rural professionals on our program where they've talked about issues around access to health and particularly issues around mental health. Any particular focus there we can expect from Federated Farmers? Yeah,
we'll be continuing to help through RANs and through general comment and conversations and opportunities we get to speak to whoever the Minister of Health will be and is. To raise those concerns, and we talk to the rural GPs and so on as well outside of the Rural Health Alliance. We know there is a huge problem coming where most of our GPs, a huge amount of our GPs are baby boomers and they're about to retire. So we know there's gaps like that are going to get worse, and probably they'll get worse for rural New Zealand quicker than they will for city dwellers. So, raising those issues and trying to make sure that those issues are addressed well ahead of time is something that we keep pushing for. And, on the mental well-being side of it, obviously having GPs that are permanent in rural areas is a good part of that. If you can get your men to come out and talk about, not feeling too well for any reason, whether it's mental wellness or an ache in their tummy or whatever, is a big thing. And so if they have to talk to a different person every time, that's a deterrent for them. So, some stability there is key, and we'll just keep banging that drum as long as we have to.
Yeah. Well, despite some of the things we've talked about being challenges, your latest survey in June, Farmer Confidence Survey, highest number recorded in at least 2 or 3 years, back to 2014, I think. In your estimation, is that something that can hold up through what's been a pretty lousy winter since then, and some pretty challenging conversations at a national level for farmers? Still resilience, that confidence, you think is going to be there with us for some time yet?
Well, I'm hoping it is, because the dairy payout is looking, quite firm, and also lambs picked up, and beef holding, and wool's even picked up. So we're hoping that, the recent conversations about who will or won't be in Parliament and government and what those changes might be, the unknown parts, hopefully they can be put aside and everyone can retain that confidence. Because we've got to make hay while the sun's shining. At the moment it is, on pricing, it certainly is shining. But, we'll just be very interesting to see what the next survey says. And I think, who is in power and what decisions they come up with will have a huge bearing on that.
Katie, we have to leave it there. Thanks very much for your time today, and we look forward to talking again throughout your time in the role.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
This interview was brought to you in association with Rabobank.